Hello and welcome to another episode of Reading Together from Sea Harp Press. I'm Eugene Luning, co-founder of Sea Harp, and today we'll be continuing our journey through C.S. Lewis's classic Mere Christianity. In our last episode, we were in Chapter 2 of Book 4. Today we're going to be looking at Chapter 3 of Book 4. The title of this chapter is Time and Beyond Time. It is a very silly idea that in reading a book, you must never skip. All sensible people skip freely when they come to a chapter which they find is going to be no use to them. In this chapter, I am going to talk about something which may be helpful to some readers, but which may seem to others merely an unnecessary complication. If you are one of the second sort of readers, then I advise you not to bother about this chapter at all, but to turn on to the next. And I'll say, let's go ahead and read it. In the last chapter, I had to touch on the subject of prayer. And while that is still fresh in your mind and my own, I should like to deal with a difficulty that some people find about the whole idea of prayer. A man put it to me by saying, I can believe in God all right, but what I cannot swallow is the idea of him intending to several 100 million human beings who are all addressing him at the same moment. And I have found that quite a lot of people feel this. And I bet you and I do too. Oftentimes when I'm praying, I realize there might be literally, as he says, 100 million people turning their attentions toward him. And so it seems, in our limited human sense, impossible that he could actually care about me. But we have a sense that he does, so we continue. Now, the first thing to notice is that the whole sting of it comes in the words, at the same moment. Most of us can imagine God attending to any number of applicants if only they came one by one, and he had an endless time to do it in. So what is really at the back of this difficulty is the idea of God having to fit too many things into one moment of time. Well, that is, of course, what happens to us. Our life comes to us moment by moment. One moment disappears before the next comes along. And there is room for very little in each. That is what, and he puts it in a capital sense here, time is like. And of course, you and I tend to take it for granted that this time series, this arrangement of past, present, and future, is not simply the way life comes to us, but the way all things really exist. We tend to assume that the whole universe and God himself are always moving on from past to future, just as we do. But many learned men do not agree with that. It was the theologians who first started the idea that some things are not in time at all. Later, the philosophers took it over, and now some of the scientists are doing the same. Almost certainly, God is not in time. His life does not consist of moments following one another. If 1 million people are praying to him at 10:30 tonight, he need not listen to them all in that one little snippet which we call 10:30. 10:30 and every other moment from the beginning of the world is always the present for him. If you like to put it that way, he has all eternity in which to listen to the split second of prayer put up by a pilot as his plane crashes in flames. Perhaps you've already been with me in another of our Lewis series on the screw tape letters. If so, and if you happen to have caught the episode on chapter 15 or letter 15, you know that this little bit of Lewis, let's call it philosophy or even theology, is absolutely one of my favorite bits of anything he ever wrote. In that chapter, chapter 15 of Screw Tape Letters, he says that the present is the point at which time touches eternity. So our experience as humans, when we're completely present to this moment, right now, is that we are living completely consciously into that timelessness that is the eternity of God. Right here, Lewis is at it again. He says 10:30 is always the present for him. God exists outside of this construct that we know not how to live outside of. And so again, the present is the point at which time touches eternity. You and I, by bringing our full attention, our full attentiveness to the very moment we are in right now, is a little taste on the tip of our tongue of the timelessness of God, of the complete attentiveness that he gives in his outside of timeness to all of us all the time. I love that image there of a pilot going down in flames. A horrifying thing that we can't even begin to imagine. And yet as they burst forth with their final prayer, all throughout the timelessness of non-time, God has been with them, and he is with them. That's how we want to live, friends. We don't want to be so bound up in our sense of time and schedule and work days and all of these things that we create a false construct of eternity for ourselves. We want to remember that we have been freed of all this. We are with him even now. I'll keep reading. That is difficult, I know. Let me try to give something, not the same, but a bit like it. Suppose I am writing a novel. I write, Mary laid down her work. Next moment came a knock at the door. For Mary, who has to live in the imaginary time of my story, there is no interval between putting down the work and hearing the knock. But I, who am Mary's maker, do not live in the imaginary time at all. Between writing the first half of that sentence and the second, I might sit down for 3 hours and think steadily about Mary. I could think about Mary as if she were the only character in the book, and for as long as I pleased. And the hours I spent in doing so would not appear in Mary's time, the time inside the story, at all. This is not a perfect illustration, of course, but it may give just a glimpse of what I believe to be the truth. God is not hurried along in the time stream of this universe any more than an author is hurried along in the imaginary time of his own novel. He has infinite attention to spare for each one of us. He does not have to deal with us in the mass. You are as much alone with him as if you were the only being he had ever created. When Christ died, listen to this, friends, when Christ died, he died for you individually, just as much as if you had been the only man in the world. The way in which my illustration breaks down is this. In it, the author gets out of one time series, that of the novel, only by going into another time series, the real one. But God, I believe, does not live in a time series at all. His life is not dribbled out moment by moment like ours. With him, it is, so to speak, still 1920 and already 1960. For his life is himself. Now, what Lewis is not saying, and I want to make very clear here, he is not saying that God, by being himself life, is some sort of a pantheistic expression where we're living inside of God, like inside of his mind, because that has been a false theology even within the church's history. What he's saying is what Jesus said when he talked about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all of those past figures, the founding faith fathers, and said they are all alive to God. So in the day that Lewis sat and wrote this, he was thinking back to 1920. At that time, he was looking ahead to that very futuristic day of 1960. Here I am recording this in 2023, and yet God is. Hence the immense power when Jesus, at the end of John 8, said to all of those people listening to him, before Abraham was born, I am. Even as Jesus was living through the time series of what we now call the first century, what for him was a day in his life, friends, he was absolutely present to all of it. Just as right now, as I'm sitting here in this chair, he is present to me and present to you on the day that you're watching this, even though they will not be the same day. He is outside of these circumstances that we call life, for he is himself life. And the more that we hew to him, the more that we lean into what he is asking of us, wanting for us, the more we have present temporal experience of the life that is eternal. It's the kind of thing that if you think about it a lot, it actually starts to give you a headache. But the more that we meditate upon it, the more timelessly we will live. That's the invitation that Lewis is giving to us, to get to commune with the timeless God. It sounds kind of interesting to me. I'll keep reading. If you picture time as a straight line along which we have to travel, then you must picture God as the whole page on which the line is drawn. We come to the parts of the line one by one. We have to leave A behind before we get to B, and cannot reach C until we leave B behind. God, from above or outside or all around, contains the whole line and sees it all. The idea is worth trying to grasp because it removes some apparent difficulties in Christianity. Before I became a Christian, one of my objections was as follows. The Christians said that the eternal God who is everywhere and keeps the whole universe going once became a human being. Well then, said I, how did the whole universe keep going while he was a baby or while he was asleep? How could he at the same time be God who knows everything and also a man asking his disciples, who touched me? You will notice that the sting lay in the time words, while he was a baby. How could he at the same time? In other words, I was assuming that Christ's life as God was in time, and that his life as the man Jesus in Palestine was a shorter period taken out of that time, just as my service in the army was a shorter period taken out of my whole life. And that is how most of us perhaps tend to think about it. We picture God living through a period when his human life was still in the future, then coming to a period when it was present, then going on to a period when he could look back on it as something in the past. But probably these ideas correspond to nothing in the actual facts. You cannot fit Christ's earthly life in Palestine into any time relations with his life as God beyond all space and time. It is really, I suggest, a timeless truth about God that human nature and the human experience of weakness and sleep and ignorance are somehow included in his whole divine life. This human life in God is, from our point of view, a particular period in the history of our world, from the year AD 1 till the crucifixion. We therefore imagine it is also a period in the history of God's own existence, but God has no history. He is too completely and utterly real to have one. For, of course, to have a history means losing part of your reality because it has already slipped away into the past, and not yet having another part because it is still in the future. In fact, having nothing but the tiny little present which has gone before you can speak about it. God forbid we should think God was like that. Even we may hope not to be always rationed in that way. If you stop and think about the absolute inarguable qualities of what Lewis said, it's actually kind of stunning. Because our own perception of having even a personal history automatically assumes that there are aspects of our life that we've lost. Like, interestingly, I was saying to my wife as I was brushing my teeth this morning, last night I dreamt of my father. But my father died coming up on 25 years ago. So in dreaming of him, I wake up to kind of a sweet sensation, but also the feeling, the human experience that maybe you have too of having lost people. They're gone just as my past is gone. But as I reminded you from Lewis's own Screwtape Letters, right now I am having life. I am having the experience of the eternal that is available to me. I'm alive to this moment. And so I'm with him. It's kind of a glorious thing that we can always take hold of. But that doesn't preclude the fact that I'm aware that in about, 5 or 10 minutes, I'm going to press stop on this recording. And that person, that future Eugene, who's going to be pressing stop on the recording, well, in sort of a weird way, he doesn't exist yet. He's the same Eugene, but sort of different. He's said words that I haven't yet said. And so the inarguable quality of time is that there are things we have lost, and there's an aspect of myself that is yet, I think, to be. Friends, as Lewis said, God is the whole page. He is the one who is outside of and looking down on and around that straight line that we perceive linear time to be. So friends, isn't it an absolutely wonderful thing that for me, as I record this, it's a Tuesday, it just so happens to be, I can today actually stop and just say, Lord, have it all. Have my present. Lord, be in my past, be leading me into the future, because I only want to be yours. And I want the things that I do to matter in the eternal way that you are doing things. So make use of me. In fact, Lord, I'm praying now, make use of my friends. May we not waste our time. May we not be living lives that are fraught because of our experience of time. Teach us to release what has been. Teach us to trust you for what is to be. And teach us to be fully alive in you. Lord, we trust to the one who is always I am. And we want to be fruitful for you. Thank you, Lord. Amen. I didn't even plan on starting to pray, but there we are. That's the beauty of stopping to be with him at any moment. I'm going to finish out the chapter. Another difficulty we get if we believe God to be in time is this. Everyone who believes in God at all believes that he knows what you and I are going to do tomorrow. But if he knows I am going to do so and so, how can I be free to do otherwise? Well, here once again, the difficulty comes from thinking that God is progressing along the timeline like us. The only difference being that he can see ahead and we cannot. Well, if that were true, if God foresaw our acts, it would be very hard to understand how we could be free not to do them. But suppose God is outside and above the timeline. In that case, what we call tomorrow is visible to him in just the same way as what we call today. All the days are now for him. He does not remember you doing things yesterday. He simply sees you doing them because though you have lost yesterday, he has not. He does not foresee you doing things tomorrow. He simply sees you doing them because though tomorrow is not yet there for you, it is for him. You never supposed that your actions at this moment were any less free because God knows what you are doing. Well, he knows your tomorrow's actions in just the same way because he is already in tomorrow and can simply watch you. In a sense, he does not know your action till you have done it, but then the moment at which you have done it is already now for him. This idea has helped me a good deal. If it does not help you, leave it alone. It is a Christian idea in the sense that great and wise Christians have held it, and there is nothing in it contrary to Christianity. But it is not in the Bible or any of the creeds. You can be a perfectly good Christian without accepting it, or indeed without thinking of the matter at all. But what I want to leave you with, my friend, is that the moment you are about to come to, the moment when our little interaction around this chapter of Mere Christianity ends, is indeed the very moment at which you can encounter God as much as you want. You can cease to do all other things. You can bring your full attention to his presence, and it will be manifest. Friends, the riches that are available to us in the timelessness, the eternal aspect of who God is are riches we haven't even begun to plumb and to enjoy. So that's my invitation to you, to not be held by the strictures of your schedule, to not think that your little busy life is what it's all about, but to, in fact, relax, be with him. Find how to abide with him in this day, so that getting back into that schedule, abiding in him, you are as fruitful as can be for his eternal purposes. Friends, we've been, I think that was, what did I say? Chapter 3 of Book 4 of Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I'm so grateful to have you join me in the study yet again, and I look forward to our next episode. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.